during our celebration this morning of the Feast of St. Vincent de Paul, that it's a day for us to reset. And here in the church world, this is our new year. So we have been working very hard to reintroduce ourselves to all of you and to share some of the programming for this year. If you recall, last year we created over 1,000 peace cranes, and they still hang in our vestibule. And it's our commitment for last year and ongoing is our commitment to a heartfelt welcome and service to marginalized communities. And we've had some opportunities for parishioners to participate in learning more about racial justice and LGBTQ communities. And we're very honored here today to have Dr. Green speak with us today. I have read her book, and I feel like I've learned a new history of Albany that I never would have known. But to get to know her a little bit better, her friend Bob Ward is going to introduce her.
Thank you, Angela. And I really want to thank all the members of the Social Justice Committee and others who have done so much to make St. Vincent's a real active center of work in many areas of social justice. It's a real pleasure to be part of a parish where that is the case. So in today's readings, both our Old Testament and New Testament readings, we heard about issues of inequity and injustice. So these things have been with us for a very, very long time. And as we know from the book of Amos and from the New Testament and other readings, there are folks over the span of history who have emerged as leaders in asking that we focus on these issues of injustice, inequity, of those who have more, those who have less. And in my time in Albany, I don't know of anyone who I would say has done that to a greater degree and with greater impact than Dr. Alice Green. So it is such a pleasure to have her with us here today. And Dr. Green, just so you know, you may be aware that Vincent de Paul, for whom this church is named, for this parish is named, was one of those folks who did many, many things to establish hospitals, schools, and otherwise provide ways to lift up folks, whether they were poor or not, whatever their station. Up on the wall behind us, we have icons representing Vincent de Paul, a number of others in the Catholic Church whom we revere for their work, Dorothy Day and others. And so we're so glad that you are able to be with us here today to talk about your work for social justice and racial equity. I first was introduced to Dr. Green some years ago by Father Peter Young, and about 10 years ago, I was fortunate enough at Don Smith's invitation, because he heard about it first. We heard that Dr. Green was organizing a book group where folks would get together and talk about originally a book that came out, I think in 2010, by a writer named Michelle Alexander called The New Jim Crow. And this was the book that really put the concept and the phrase mass incarceration at the forefront of what a lot of people were doing and talking about with regard to criminal justice reform. And in those meetings down in the South End, Dr. Green would lead conversations about issues both national and local. So in that process, I learned a lot more about Alice Green, the inspiring thought leader and powerful community activist. I also learned a lot about Alice Green, the individual, fascinating, delightful and deeply kind woman who, for example, would be the person, if someone in the group had a birthday, Alice would be the one who brought a homemade birthday cake with nice frosting on it and welcome everyone to have a slice and celebrate the birthday person. Over the past year or so, I've had the real privilege of working with Dr. Green on a day-to-day basis in a program called Albany Law Enforcement Assisted Diversion, which is a collaborative effort among Dr. Green, the Albany Police, Mayor Sheehan, County Executive McCoy, District Attorney Soares, and others, that seeks to move men and women who experience mental illness, addiction, homelessness, and poverty out of our criminal legal system and instead get them the help that they need. Dr. Green is largely responsible for this program coming to Albany in 2016 as only the third jurisdiction in the country after it was created in Seattle 5 years earlier, and today LEAD is going on in more than 60 places around the United States and in other countries as well. So instead of being arrested and prosecuted for low-level charges such as petty larceny, trespass, or possession of small amounts of illegal substances, LEAD connects individuals with case managers from Catholic Charities who are experts in helping them meet their needs for housing, treatment, and other services. Dr. Green's book gives us many other examples of the impact she has had over the last few decades. And I'll just mention one other concrete example, and that is the Community Police Review Board that now is expanding its portfolio to have very significant powers to create accountability for law enforcement in the city of Albany. I think in many ways that is a model for other communities as well. Alice Green has been a central player, if not the most important figure in making all of that happen. And her work really reminds us that the most important part of making government work better, the most important people in making that happen, often are not the elected people who get the attention and ultimately make the official decisions, but the most important impetus often comes from individuals who create an environment where the elected officials have to respond to the people. And again, I would really struggle to find somebody I would say represents that more than Alice Green. I'll just close by saying that Dr. Green's book, among other things, provides a list of 10 lessons for those who are interested in social justice. One is, do not be afraid to call out the injustices you see. Another, do not be afraid to speak truth to power. And you really got to read the whole list. You got to read the whole book. If you have not yet had a chance, St. Vincent's does have a few copies. You can get it at the library, or you can get it at the book house at Stuyvesant Plaza or other booksellers. So we are very lucky to have Alice Green as a leader in Albany and in New York State. Lucky to have her here with us today at St. Vincent's. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Alice Green.
so many things in that book. And not only was I happy to do that, but it had so many lessons in it for me that the Center for Law and Justice really, for the Center for Law and Justice, really became sort of like a Bible almost. And we decided that our work would be done in line with Michelle Alexander's book. And in that book, we saw that there were three major oppressive forces in our country that made the problem of inequity so much greater. And she pointed to. Can you speak up? Do I have the microphone? Do I have the microphone? It's not working. It might not be. Okay, I don't know. I didn't know if it was on or not. Oh, they actually expected me to turn this thing on? No way. I'm sorry. I thought it was on. But anyways, I started talking about the new Jim Crow and how it led the center to do the work that it's now doing. The Center for Law and Justice started in 1985, and it's still going on. And the focus at that time had to do with incarceration and policing. And it was started as a result of what I saw that happened in the city of Albany, was that a young black man was killed by police officers because he was making noise in the street. And they followed him to his apartment where he locked the doors and would not come out. And so they went around and looked through the window, and they murdered Jesse Davis. There was no reason to kill him. And so this really upset so many people in our community. Thank goodness they were upset, because that's the only way you're going to do something. And so one of the things that we did was to get together and form the Center for Law and Justice. And we've been working on issues around mass incarceration ever since then. And I am just so honored that I get a chance to work with people like Bob and people that I've met through the new Jim Crow study groups that we had. And I bring this up because I want to let you know that for 10 years, we tried to get Michelle Alexander to come to Albany. And it's amazing how many groups I work with in an attempt to try to get Michelle to come. We thought it was very important for her to be here and for this community to listen to what she had to say and to understand why we started the Center for Law and Justice. And only recently, we were successful. She will be here and be sponsored by St. Rose College and the University at Albany. And that's on the 11th, forget the date, on the 11th of October. And it will be at St. Rose College. So I hope many of you will be able to be there. So anyways, that's her book. Now I'm going to switch to mine, because it really follows from what Michelle Alexander, I think, taught me and a whole bunch of people about this whole issue of inequity. As I started to say, she focused on three major forces, oppressive forces, that have put us in a position that we're in right now of social inequity. The first was, of course, enslavement. And I'm sure many of you understand why that was so oppressive. This country was stealing the labor of black people and treating them as if they were not human. And then along comes the second oppressive force that she talks about, and that, of course, is Jim Crow. And we know about Jim Crow, which is segregation in this country that lasted all that time. And we only got some relief through the civil rights movement that took place in the 60s. And she sees mass incarceration as the third most oppressive force that affects the lives, particularly poor people and people of color. And she spends a lot of time looking at that issue. So that's why, one of the reasons why we focus so heavily on it, because we understand the impact of the new Jim Crow, which is mass incarceration. And you have to look at it in that way to really understand why we're so passionate about working to end mass incarceration. Everything I do since her book has pretty much been focused on mass incarceration, why we use it, and the impact that it's had. And she says it has created another caste system where people cannot get out of it. If you've read anything or know anything about the caste system in India, it's sort of like that. And there's a new book called Caste, which of course deals with that. Wilkinson's book says that white people almost automatically devalue black people. You might not think it, but it does happen. And I believe her, because through my experiences in life, I found that to be true. And so what I'm going to do today is talk a little bit about why I did the book, and maybe talk about some of the issues that are there in the book. And I hope we can have a conversation, particularly about prisons and mass incarceration. But first I want to tell you a little bit about the book, which I think I have a copy of here. And everybody always asks me to read a little portion of it, so I might do that. But first of all, I want to tell you how this book came about and why I did it the way I did it. This book is totally black produced. I wrote it. The publisher, the editor were black, and the person who helped me with the cover was black. The person who printed the book was black. And the feeling was that it was very important for black people to tell their own story. I mean, other people could have written all of this stuff that I have in there, but the feeling was it was very important for us as black people to tell our story the way we wanted to. And I look at the cover, if you've seen the cover. It was really interesting because last Saturday there was a book fair out at SUNY, at the Writers Institute. And so I was there with the book, and people would come up, of course, and ask me about it. Some of them bought it. But one woman who came up, she looked at the book and she said, "Is this a cartoon book?" Sort of took me back by that. I never thought of it in that way. But when I thought about it, it was a little funny in terms of how this cover came to be. And some of you might recognize where it's from. The Times Union took the actual reporter for the Times Union, reporter of color, did the original videotaping and photographing of an incident that occurred in Albany, was it last year, year before? I lose track of dates. But at any rate, you probably heard about it after it was related to the George Floyd demonstrations that took place in the city of Albany, and some young people had camped out in front of the police station downtown. And no one could move them. They decided they were going to stay there for a while. And they were in communication with the city. And the city said, we're not going to touch you. But all of a sudden, one day, these troopers, these police officers, dressed in military garb, which we saw as military, with the mask and everything, came in and removed these young people without any warning, which is totally opposite of what they said they would do. And so they were removed, and the thing about it is the police officers had removed, many of them had removed their badges and their name tags, which they are required to wear. So for whatever reason, and you could probably guess, they did not want to be identified. And when I heard that they were breaking up the camp, I had a couple of my staff people down there, and they told me what was happening. So I, ran down as quickly as I could, and I saw what was happening. They had all of these troopers lined up on one side of the street. They had a guardrail set up and would not allow anyone to come past that guardrail. And so when I got on the scene, I see all these police officers, and I realized what was happening and that I thought it was wrong. So they said, you have to get behind this guardrail. And I said, I will not do that, because what you're doing is wrong. So here I am standing out here facing the police, and the other people are behind the railing. And so the police didn't know what to do about this crazy woman who was standing there, and so they didn't do anything. But what happened was that after a while, these young people, and some of them from Black Lives Matter, realized that, wait a minute, something's not right here. So one young woman came from behind, and she, I could hear her say, she's standing there all alone. And so she came and she took my arm and she stood there with me. And then the next thing I know, one by one, all of these people are coming from behind the railing and standing there and facing the police. And it was a marvelous time, because it was also an intergenerational type of protest. They were learning from me, and of course I always learn from young people, that if you see an injustice, you have to stand your ground. And so that's why I decided to use that photograph for the cover of this book. And I had a young artist who helped me figure out how to do it rather than using the actual photograph. And that was really nice to have him involved. So that's how the book got done. And we released it in last December. And since then, it's been, also, I must mention, this is a fundraiser for the Center for Law and Justice. I do not get a penny from it. And so it's been selling really well. And so that the center is happy about that. And the purpose of me doing the book, really, was to do things like this, have some kind of community discussions about the issues that I raise and the ones that I care about and I think are important. And I would probably not be here if I hadn't written this book. I don't know, maybe you would have invited me. But at any rate, I've been doing a lot of these with community people, and that, as I said, that was the purpose of it all. And so I think I've been able to do that. In the book, it's part memoir, because I do talk a little bit about me and where I came from, my family. It's also a part history. I talk a little bit about the presence of African Americans in Albany, and I talk about the black migration into Albany, which I was very familiar with. 'Cause I've been in Albany for a long time, and towards the end of that migration, I worked with a lot of people at Trinity Institution. You're probably familiar with Trinity Institution. So it's part that, and it's also part of it is a tribute to people who have been activists and have done so much to bring about change in the city of Albany. And I wanted to do that. And then I do talk a lot about the Center for Law and Justice and the work that we do. And through it all, with all these years of work and activism, you know, we have seen some changes, but we got a long way to go. We have not dealt with that issue of mass incarceration in a way that I hope that we would have. But that's why I'm still in this business. I shouldn't call it a business. This is a passion. It's a calling. It's a commitment. And so I work at it, you know, from starting at 5 o'clock in the morning until about 10. So I do it, you know, Monday to Monday. But I have a great group of people who work with me. And again, as I said, we work with young people to try to reach them and to get them involved in this whole movement for social change. And it's a difficult one, but it's one that we have to do. I also go back and I tell them when it gets to be so difficult, you think you're not making any progress, I go back and look at the period of enslavement. And people then did not believe that you could really get rid of chattel slavery. And I'm also committed to that because my great-grandmother, who lived almost 100 years, I was fortunate to be able to see her as an infant before she died. And she was born enslaved. And my grandmother, my paternal grandmother, was a sharecropper. So I'm very familiar with the impact of racism and discrimination and its impact on black people and this whole society of ours. So the work has to continue because we haven't gotten there yet. And I think we all need to be involved in the social movement to make sure that all of us are seen as equal people, human beings. And it's a tall order, but it's one that has to happen. So that's my introduction. I think we decided that you would ask me a couple of questions, Bob, and then I go from there, and then we'll open it up.
I'm going to ask Dr. Green at least one question. I know that other folks surely will have theirs and perhaps comments as well. We just ask that you come up to the microphone so that it's easier for those of us, including myself, whose hearing is less than perfect, to be able to hear the conversation. So, Dr. Green, I just wanted to start with one of the first things that you write about in your book is an experience you had when you were 15 years old, and you describe and what you call a brutal and abrupt introduction to the evils of racism and white supremacy. And it was in the context of what should have been a positive experience for a teenage girl. I wonder if you would talk about that a little bit.
Okay, I didn't know whether you wanted me to read part of that section or just,
Whatever.
I don't know if people have read it, so I don't. Why don't I read it, part of it? I only read part of it. But I think and one of the reasons why I do this and one of the reasons why I included it, sometimes people don't understand the individual personal impact of racism. I'm more focused on the system because I think racism has penetrated all of our institutions in this country. And so I focus a lot on changing the system. But I think a lot of people don't understand that because they don't understand the impact on individuals and how the system actually works. So I started with this incident that happened to me, and I've gotten such reactions to it that I'm right now finishing up on an entire book with stories about growing up in a system that was racist and the impact it had on me and my family. And so that's coming out soon, and I'm doing some other things around it. But I'll read it to you. And even when I read this a lot and I think about it, but every time I read it, it still bothers me. So I hope it bothers you. That's one of the best things I do is make people feel uncomfortable. I haven't got an award for that, by the way. It was the dawn of the 1960s civil rights movement. My family had moved to Witherby, which is a small iron ore mining hamlet nestled in the Adirondack Mountains, where few blacks resided. The few who were there were beckoned from the South to work in the dangerous mines along with mostly first and second generation European immigrants. These blacks also came to escape Jim Crow, the oppression connected with it, and find a land free from racism. We soon learned our new home was no panacea, but displays of racism were much more subtle. At the age of 15, I had a brutal and abrupt awakening to the evils of racism and white supremacy, and they would shape my view of the world and the work I would devote my life to doing. Strong friendships were hard to come by in Witherby, but I was fortunate to live next door to two white twin girls who were my age and became like sisters to me. We were inseparable. Now that we were of working age, one of the twins, Myrtle, and I decided to seek employment in the tourism business and earn money for needed school clothing and supplies. We knew how to clean, wash dishes, and make beds, just the skills needed for a chambermaid position. We landed a position at Claudius's Motel and Restaurant in Paradox Lake near Scroon Lake, but it was some 40 miles from our homes. The job offered free food and housing, so we accepted the maid positions and looked excitedly towards working and living together as roommates. We arrived at our work location where the white Southern owner, Mrs. Claudius, greeted us. During the summer tourism season, she and her family resided in the main house on the property in a large, well-furnished second-floor apartment, which was part of the introductory tour she gave to her new employees. Myrtle and I thought we had struck pay dirt. Following the tour, we met her regular summer staff, who she brought with her from the South. It was a married black couple who cooked for the restaurant. They were assisted by a young, well-built black teenager. We also met the bartender and waitress staff, who were all white, and they lived together in a nice little staff cottage. The time came for Mrs. Claudius to show us to our room. Myrtle and I could hardly contain our excitement about being together during our first stay away from home. Mrs. Claudius showed Myrtle to her room, located in the family's luscious living quarters. We explained how we expected to live in a shared room. Mrs. Claudius quickly told us that that was impossible. Then she led me to my room. We walked to the back of the building, out to a large barn with steps leading up to its unfinished loft, a space with a high-pitched ceiling and no furnishings. Mrs. Claudius explained that a section of the loft would be my room. The other black staff worked a night shift. They were housed in the barn as well. I stared in disbelief and fear. Because I was black, I had to live in a barn, while my best friend, who was white, would live with the owner's family in a large furnished room in the big white house. I became numb with anxiety and anger. Myrtle seemed dumbfounded as well and begged to room with me. Mrs. Claudius reiterated how our request was out of the question. I was being told I had to live like the animals who once occupied the space now reserved for me and the other black staff. What should I do? I kept asking myself, knowing my mother desperately wanted me to work for the summer to help her get things my siblings and I would need for the coming school year. I did not want to disappoint her and add to the stress my family was undergoing due to our poverty situation. Added to these concerns was the fact that I had no way to get home short of walking 40 miles. I waited until the black night staff came on duty to ask them how they felt being housed in a barn and segregated from the rest of the staff. Seemingly bewildered by my question, they simply dismissed me by replying, "Well, this is the way it is." Fearing a night alone in the big barn and confused about what to do about the situation, I slowly made my way up the stairs at night as night was falling. A single cot awaited my anxiety-ridden body. Reluctantly, I crawled into it. Unable to sleep, I noticed something perched on a high beam above my bed. What was it? Soon others joined it, although fearful of them. I had never seen live ones in my life. Bats. Bats were circling the room. I sat in the room and I cried until dawn. I had my answer about what to do. I marched down to the big house and asked to see Mrs. Claudius that morning. I relayed how angry I was over her display of racism, and after I finished my loud, angry ranting, she told me with a flushed face that I was fired. My response to her was, quote, "Too late, I already quit." Myrtle had joined us in the room. She chimed in that she was quitting too. We gathered our belongings and headed for the highway to go home. I took along my dignity, self-respect, and commitment to fight racism and white supremacy. My promise to myself at 15 years of age was to never again allow white people to demean, disrespect, or devalue me or other blacks, particularly those in poverty and under the control of our legal criminal system. After all, my dad left the South primarily due to his fear of convict leasing and chain gangs that were so much a part of the criminal justice system. So that was the story that I wrote about that particular incident. It goes on, but I just wanted you to get a flavor of it because it had such an impact on me. And I realized that not only did that kind of situation happen to me, but my brothers encountered the same thing when they went to work in upstate New York. In a lot of these places, they were not allowed to room with other white students. So that's what it was like. Yes?
Thank you for being here. It's
Thank you for
lovely to
inviting
have
me.
you. That story, I read that in your book, and it's very touching to hear that a 15-year-old has to be introduced to the white world and in that way. And I think it's important that all of us who are born white are able to or should work at being empathic toward those who don't suffer or who suffer from the oppressions of racism. So I want to go from that, what you said, what you talked about in your experience, to something that I think is current right now. We're going through that thing that's called bail reform.
Oh, yes.
And I'm not sure if everybody here sitting here is aware of what bail reform entails and how it's, I think, this coming election this November, there are sides to it in this election that people are opposed to it and want to see it. They want to see reform done away with.
Yeah.
Because of, I'm not sure. I think a good part of it is the way the media is treating people of color who happen to be also poor and unable to raise bail under certain circumstances, and their peers who are more affluent have resources where they can get out of jail in a hurry. And it's always been the case that poor people, again, I think especially in our community, people of color, are stuck. And they're stuck for long periods of time and are more likely to be incarcerated for a longer period of time. So could you speak about bail reform and what the Law and Justice Center is doing in that regard?
Yeah. Well, you've done a good job of telling us really what it is about. Yes, as you probably know, in this country, you are deemed to be innocent until proven guilty, and I think that's a very important part of our Constitution and our life. That if anybody could just point a finger at somebody and says you're guilty of something, and and you can go to jail for it, I mean, doesn't make much sense, does it? So we've had a system where using bail, judges are allowed to use bail for the purpose of, and there's only one purpose, and that was to ensure that you show up at other proceedings in the court. So that's the purpose of bail. It's not to punish people. It's not to put them in prison. Nothing. You're innocent until you're proven guilty. Now, unfortunately, with a bail system that's set up, I don't care what it is, if you can afford to post bail, then you're released. If you're poor, and I'm simplifying this, but if you're poor and you can't afford bail, you have to go to jail. Now, what has been happening here is that we've worked very hard, the Center for Law and Justice has been very involved in this movement to make sure that we change that so that people could be, if you can't, since it's the only thing that separates me from somebody else is if I can afford the bail. That doesn't seem equitable, that doesn't seem right, and it doesn't serve public safety in any way. So we worked very hard with a lot of groups, especially in the city of Albany, to change that system. And luckily there was legislation that has changed it to some extent. Okay, so that now if you go before a judge, you're accused of a crime, and there is a number of criminal acts that are, not included, but just simplifying it. But now you can be released on your own recognizance. They don't have to use bail. Of course, there are many in our society who find that objectionable, and certainly district attorneys do, for one group, and so they've been fighting against it. I mean, there've been a few little tweaks to the legislation, but it stands right now. And one of the things that's been happening with district attorneys, that they're sort of promoting, they want to get rid of this reform that came about, and they're doing what we call fear-mongering, telling the public that, now all these people with guns are let out of court, they should be in jail. All kinds of things are happening because of this reform. Now, there was just a program, a Zoom that I watched the other day that was part of the DCJS. I don't know if anybody saw it, Department of Criminal Justice Services, and John Jay College, where they had looked at all the statistics to see if this is really true. Is it true that if you let people get out on their own recognizance instead of going to jail, is it true that it creates more crime? And they've been pushing that. The district attorneys have been pushing that it does, and a lot of other people saying that it does do that. And so we've been saying, well, where's the evidence that that's true? And it hasn't been forthcoming, but with this particular meeting by Zoom the other day, they released an incredible amount of statistics on what's actually happening. And one of the things that they found out is that people who go to jail instead of being released on their own recognizance are more likely to commit a crime. So, which totally destroys that argument, at least we thought so. But the statistics do not support what the district attorneys are now saying. It just doesn't. And so, but you're right, media sort of helps it along, and people are convinced that it must be what's causing an increase in crime and violence. But it's not from bail reform. It's made it a little bit more equitable, that now everything doesn't depend on your ability to pay for it. And it shouldn't be. Thank you for mentioning.
Thank you for your many years of advocacy and hard work.
Thank you.
I just want to address the incident at the behind the police station, Arch Street Station, with those young people about a year and a half ago now. It was
Yeah.
June. No, it was June.
What I was talking about here?
June, yeah,
Yeah.
the one you're talking about. Because I went down there. When I heard about it on the news, I said, I just want to meet these people. So I went down there, and they were the meekest people, and half of them were white, and about half were black when I was there.
Yeah.
And there were about 15, 16 folks. And I couldn't figure out what all the fuss that was beginning to roil in the background was about, because they were very meek. I chatted with them. One of them had come all the way from Peekskill. Another one had come all the way from Keene, New York, near Lake Placid area. And I said, well, why'd you come so far? And they said, well, we wanted to do something to commemorate the killing of George Floyd, which had been a year prior, in 20, and then 21 was this demonstration, and it was tiny. The one thing that got people a little upset was this fire pit. The fire pit was like what you put in your backyard. It was not a big thing. So. And I talked to a minister down there from the community. I spoke with a few other people who were, like me, interested in supporting this, and they had come. The guy from, little short guy, he's a little Jewish guy, I love him. He's a reporter for NBC, Channel 13. So right now his name escapes me, and he was talking to people. And when I heard that they had pulled this raid like some kind of thing with, American terrorists attacking the Capitol, I couldn't figure it out. And then I began to say, I've been doing this stuff. I went to a kind of liberal college, Manhattanville College, run by the Sacred Heart Nuns. And I started working on things just within the college campus and kept it up on a very tiny scale, because I'm kind of, I'm not a real outgoing person in a way. And I thought, how are we still here after 60 years just of my life? I guess that's the terrible anguish that we carry. And I'm privileged because I'm white. I have no money much, but I'm white. So I have privilege. I'm 81 years old. That doesn't count for much anymore, but I'm still privileged because I'm alive and healthy. And I guess my point is the frustration that these things happen over little tiny things. This is not a crisis. This is a way that these young people were expressing themselves. And I don't know, maybe you have a comment on that, maybe you don't. And I don't want to make it about me, but it's like, come on, this is not reality. What was going on there was real. This police raid was not. And I guess I'm so frustrated now I don't know what to do, because I haven't got much time left in this world. So that's all.
I'm glad you were there.
Well, at least you know what's real if you go.
Yeah. It was that period of time was really nice because it brought a lot of different people together, which I thought was wonderful. And I think we all felt that something was about to happen and change. And maybe it hasn't. Yes, hi.
Hi, my name is Gina. It's an honor to meet you. I have been pretty much in my past institutionalized for approximately, I want to say between 17 and 18 years. My long journey myself began at Cooperstown County Jail. I started off with a young woman who was a beloved friend of mine. I won't say any names, but she was a crack baby from birth. And then from there, I went into Marcy Central New York Psychiatric Center. I was back and forth between County Jail and Marcy probably about 8 times. My endeavors of being inside Marcy was pretty much dealing with a lot of people who are Bloods or Crips. Not everybody. Everybody had their own instant offense. I had mine, they had theirs. From there, I went about 6 months later to Mid-Hudson, where I spent 7 years. 7 years of education. I learned RET while I was there. I learned DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy skills. For those of you who don't know what it is, RET is rational emotive therapy, which is basically dealing with people who are criminals. Not everybody who was there had created or committed what per se a crime. They were found not responsible due to mental health or defect, or took the 330-20 plea, rather known in the past as the insanity plea. Now, many of these people that I endeavored while I was there obviously were black, some were Chinese. I met some Russian people while I was there. Couldn't speak hardly any English. But primarily, I met a lot of people who were a mix of Haitian, and mainly American blacks. From everywhere from building 3 to 4 to building 2, which is where I resided. And we're talking 300 people in the year that Obama was put into presidency. And I, along with probably about, I would say, a good 15 to 20 people who are on a discharge preparation unit at that time, I managed to muster up a whole bunch of people on that unit and fight for our right to vote. And for the first time, that facility got to vote in the year Obama was put into presidency. I myself, with Robert Corliss, who was from the head of the NAMI department of the forensic facility, came in and pushed for that voting to be allowed, because we had rights. And once my mom found out we weren't being allowed to vote, she made it very well known to Robert Corliss that that was not something that she was going to accept. And so probably about a good 2/3 to 3/4 of the people that got to vote that year, you know, depending upon whether they understood their right to vote or if they wanted to vote, whatever. And my question is to you, knowing my own education, I put myself through school out in Denver, Colorado for approximately 4 to 5 years. Went home, left home probably about 17, 18 years old, put myself through school. And I learned while I was in a business ethics class that when it comes to voting, okay, I learned that the number one thing that happened in history was men voted first. Women never got the right to vote.
Right.
Especially women of color. They didn't even get the right to vote until after white women got the right to vote. And I'm talking like, from my education, I'm talking they've only been allowed to vote, black women, a little over 50 years. If only people understood, to me, the importance that it is to vote. I never voted. I'm Native. I never understood the importance of voting.
Yeah.
And if people understood the importance of voting, we might get somebody in there who cares enough about the mentally ill, about the disabled, about the people who are shortchanged because of their color or because of their ethnicity. And in my experiences of being inside of the walls of these facilities, that was the one thing that I really, really respected and appreciated, and thanked some of the people who finally stepped up to the plate and allowed it to happen. Because even right here in Albany, when I was inside CDPC, they did not allow us the right to vote. They did not push for it. When I worked for a mental health association in New York State underneath Glenn Lieberman, they asked me and they came to me and they said, "What do you know about Capital District Psychiatric Center?" And I told them the truth. They don't allow people to vote. They don't push for it. They don't give us a piece of paper, a ballot, nothing. There's nothing. And I don't think it's not necessarily fair. It's my right. And I want it. And I think my peers should be allowed to have it too.
Right. Well,
So I just was wondering what it must feel like from your point of view to be in a position of which where, wow, my history has come this far that I'm a woman and I'm female and I get to vote.
I think you certainly hit on something that's very important, and an issue regarding people who are incarcerated or institutionalized, very, very important. We work at the Center for Law and Justice. We've been working on this issue for so long because it changed 10 years ago, but all the people who are incarcerated in prisons, as you know, they're still not allowed to vote. They weren't even counted in upstate New York as being part of a community. So people who are incarcerated on a felony charge still cannot vote. But what happens, and I saw this happening in upstate New York, especially because I spent a lot of time up there, that 70% of the people who are black that live in the Adirondacks, 70% of them, of all the people there, are incarcerated. They were not counted as people, much like during the period of enslavement. And who was benefiting from it? Politicians, because they didn't have to go out there and, they counted the people who were incarcerated as part of that community, right? So when you ran for office, all you got to do is get a few votes and you're in.
Right.
Okay? But meanwhile, and then they would come to Albany in our legislature and vote against all of the legislation that would have helped people who are incarcerated and people of color. So we pushed for that for so long. Now they allow them to be counted from where they come, but they still can't vote. So we have pushed and pushed for that. We do some education work inside of the jails so that people know that they are allowed to vote. A lot of times people don't know that, and they're in jail, that they're allowed to vote.
That's right.
Without a felony conviction. A lot of people don't realize that even after they've been released from prison, that they are allowed to vote.
The only thing that they're supposed to be required to do is be able to tell you who's the president, what day it is, and the year.
So
You have to be quizzed on those few things, and if you can answer those few things, then you can vote. If you're psychologically
this
prepared.
goes way back. I mean, because this sort of part of the whole issue regarding incarceration is, and why it looks so much like enslavement, because, and I'm sure you realize the 13th Amendment does allow slavery to continue if you're in the criminal legal system.
Yep.
Okay, and you cannot vote. So voting, I mean, we have people in our office now who are out there trying to get people who are not aware of the fact that they can vote to vote, making sure everybody's registered. We finally pushed, and I've been talking to the League of Women Voters about this for so long, that they take a position that would allow people who are incarcerated in prison, who have felony convictions, that they be allowed to vote. It's so undemocratic to be in a society where you cannot vote. I mean, it makes no sense. That's the one group that we have not included in voting rights right now, are people with felony convictions who are incarcerated. All the other groups, recognized groups in this country, can now vote. And you're right. I mean, when we started, it was only white men who could vote, and men with property who could vote.
That's right.
You know, so all of this, it's been changing. Women finally got the right to vote, and but we
rest is
still
history.
don't allow incarcerated people to vote who are on felony convictions. So I'm glad you brought that up. Thank you for mentioning it.
Hi. In Bob's introduction, he started mentioning 10 things that we can do in the book that you wrote to promote social justice, and I wondered if you would touch on those.
Okay, those are 10 things that I sort of drew from my experience in terms of what I did and what I would recommend for people who want to be activists. But there is something that I would like to ask everybody to do, and thanks for asking me that. I wanted to mention it, because there are things in our community that are happening, and a lot of times people don't know about it, and it perpetuates this inequality that we're talking about. And I have to point to a case that we've been working on for a while, and some of you might remember it. I think it was January, February, there was a young man on New Scotland Avenue who was walking his dog, and the police stopped him, and something happened. The police claimed that the man was coming towards them with a knife. He had his dog, and what happened next was that this young man was shot in his stomach 3 times. And he's been in and out of the hospital since then. We know that he had mental health issues. He was schizophrenic, and he's had all kinds of mental health problems. And so he did not hurt anybody. He was sort of in crisis, and he has been charged with a couple of crimes. And one of them was menacing a police officer and attempted assault on a police officer. And I'm not trying to say that's right or wrong. I'm simply saying this is what happened. I have visited the man in the hospital. He stayed there for months on months. We never thought he would survive this long, but he has. But he's not in good condition. And he's being prosecuted for those 2 crimes. One of them would mandate that he go to prison. This man can barely walk. He went from 180 pounds, now he weighs a little less than 80. He has 2 children, and he's back in the hospital right now. And he's being prosecuted for something that will put him to prison, which will, I'll tell you right now, would be a death sentence. In New York State, we do not have the death penalty, but to put this man in prison would amount to a death sentence. And if you're opposed to the death penalty, and I hope you are, I think what we're trying to do now is to make people aware of what's going on and to get people to respond. Somebody should say something, whether it's a letter to the editor or to the district attorney's office or whatever it happens to be, or to tell people about it. We're going to be doing some more things about this, because I certainly don't want it on my conscience that I did nothing to prevent this man from going into prison, and he will die. His lawyers will tell you that right now. and his doctors will tell you that as well. He cannot go to prison. So what do? You have a voice, and if you really want to work on issues of equity, justice, then I think you have to use it in whatever way you see fit. But you'll be hearing more about this particular case, because a lot of people, we're starting to get a lot of people trying to do something to say that we cannot carry out this death sentence. You know, so that's one of the things and when I talk about, I have my 10 little lessons, that's one of them. You always have to speak truth to power. And you have to develop a thick skin, but you have to do something, okay? It's nice to talk about things and, come to meetings, but if you don't do anything, you're part of the problem, okay? So you'll be hearing more about this, but meanwhile, as I said, if you have a pen or a typewriter or a computer, start writing. That would be my suggestion. You can write, as I said, you can do a letter to the editor. It's Jordan Young is the name of the young man. You can write to the district attorney's office, which is really where it's at. You could even write to the public defender's office if you want. The public defender's office is defending the young man who is just barely making it right now. Jordan Young. Jordan Young. Excuse me? No. He's not been convicted of. No. So right now, as I said, they're trying to send him to prison, which is mandated on one of those charges. And there's nothing we can do if that happens. His lawyer is working very hard to make sure it doesn't happen. But if the district attorney is the most powerful person in the whole system, district attorneys can do anything. They can drop the charges. We've worked on other cases where that has happened, but there's it doesn't provide any safety to me to send a man who's just about dead from gunshot wounds to his stomach to prison. That he can barely move. Okay, makes no sense to me. So anyway, that's one thing you can do.
Dr. Green, I'll ask you another question. First, I want to mention, having worked for elected officials, I couldn't agree more that writing a letter. Is this off?
You need to speak a little slower and louder.
Oh, a little slower, okay. Having worked for elected officials, I couldn't agree more that writing a letter to the editor is one of the simplest and most direct ways that any of us can get people in positions of influence to hear from someone, even in these days of reduced attention to newspapers. Dr. Green, I bought a copy of your book to give to some friends who have a couple of young children, for the young children, and I asked you to inscribe it, which you did, and I don't remember if you recall, I don't know if you recall what you wrote in it, but you said, learn your history. Yes. And I thought that was just such a wonderful instruction to young people. And for anyone who knows young people who might be interested, this is a wonderful gift to give to them, I believe. We have seen ebbs and flows in our history within the criminal justice system. In the 60s, of course, we saw the enactment of the Rockefeller drug laws, and I remember, I'm sure others do, in the 80s, year after year, New York State was building another new prison and another new prison and another new prison because the population was going up. And some people said at the time, maybe we should just change the drug laws and do other things so we don't need these prisons. But people didn't listen at the time. But eventually they did, and we did make at least some changes to the drug laws. Now the prison population has left with less than half of what it was at its peak. For many years, you and others said we need more accountability for the police. And ultimately, we got this Community Police Review Board, among other changes. So we have seen some things happen that people thought could never happen, and many people said should not happen. You are among folks today who argue for a pretty dramatic change in our legal system, which is abolition of prison entirely. And I think it's hard for a lot of us, including myself, to understand how that would work, or how we could possibly do that. Can you talk about that idea, and is it an ideal that is meant to make us think differently? Is it a practical idea, or how should we think about that idea? How do you think about it?
Okay. First of all, the question I would have to ask before I even do that is, do people understand what causes crime? And do you understand the purpose of prisons? If I asked you what's the purpose of the prison, who could tell me? It's what? Should be rehabilitation.
But it's punishment.
It's punishment. It's definitely punishment. It's not rehabilitation. So when I'm talking about the system as it now exists, makes no sense, because if the purpose is punishment, and we know that when people are punished and put in prison, the recidivism rate goes up. Norway has perhaps, I think, the lowest recidivism rate, and they're not about punishment. And you have to understand that prisons were started for as a place to do penance. That's why they call them penitentiaries. The idea was that you put people in prison and you somehow to treat them, rehabilitate them, and they come back out into the community. That is no longer the case. When that philosophy and approach, we were talking about a white population. If you look at these old movies about who's in prison, I bet you don't see any black people. It wasn't until they changed, well, the drug war had a lot to do with it. But what is if the purpose is to simply punish, it makes no sense to me. If you're talking about, and even rehabilitation, we don't know how to do at all. If we talk about putting people and empowering them, become something different, empowering them, giving them the resources, the know-how to become a part of our society, that's very different. But just to put people in prison to punish them does nothing for me. It does nothing for you. So I look at the system that we have now, which is probably never be reformed. We talk about prison reform. I don't believe that the current system can be reformed. So we have to come up with a different way of dealing with criminal behavior. So if you answer the question, what causes crime, I think that'll tell you the answer is not prisons. I mean, we could spend a lot of time talking about it. Evidently we don't have that kind of time. But I am opposed, I think it's immoral to put people in a cage. I'd rather figure out something else that will either treat them or empower them. And that, for me, is much more in line with providing safety. So, but this, as I said, I could spend the whole day talking about what's wrong with it. We do not need prisons. They didn't fall from the sky. You know, we haven't always had prisons. It's not the only way. There are all kinds of alternatives to prison. But if you say sometimes it has to do with poverty, sometimes it has to do with mental health, which is what we do with LEAD, we're saying that these are some of the reasons. It doesn't change because the behavior, the criminal behavior changes. So why aren't we thinking about how do we correct a system that allows this to happen? And so, you know, it's, for me, it makes no sense because prisons don't work. We know they don't work. So why am I spending all this money when I could be using it to do something that lifts up people instead of, you know, impacting them? And it looks a whole lot like enslavement to me. You can't tell me what the difference is because it destroys families, it separates families, it does all of the things that it makes people worse. If you're in prison, chances are your child's going to end up in prison. So prisons have nothing to offer us other than retribution and punishment, and that's not enough for me.
Well, we'll leave it at that, and that's a powerful and inspiring thought for us to end with. Thank you so much for taking time out of what I know is your very busy schedule to be with us today. Do we have one more very quick question or comment? Okay.
Oh yeah, I didn't see you there.
I am.
One of the great loves of my life is Jonathan Gradez. So
I was going to comment on that, but this is kind of a walk. Thank you for this walk through memory lane because Jonathan and I marched against apartheid back in 1981. It was shortly after we married. I worked with Jay Coleman. Mm-hmm. I'm a neighbor of Mark Dunley's. And I'm originally from Philadelphia, but I came here in 1974 and started working in 1975. And my entire work life, excluding the time I spent raising my kids, was spent in criminal justice. Ran a court watching program in Troy Police Court, did a bail fund out of Troy Police Court. I worked for the New York State Coalition for Criminal Justice. And my last job my mother kept saying, how do you like your new job? 13 years into working for the New York State Defenders Association.
Yeah.
But I wanted to thank you for your recognition.
Yeah, you know.
And Jonathan, there's nobody who believed that prisons should not exist than Jonathan.
Yeah, I learned so much from him. That's why he's acknowledged in my book. I was in Europe when he died.
It'll be 3 years next month, next Sunday.
I said I have to get back home. Because I couldn't imagine being somewhere else and not being. And because Jonathan had such an impact on my life, I think about him all the time.
Me too.
Yeah. Yes, I'm sure. Thank you for being here. Thank you for.
Yes, sir. Would you mind coming to the microphone?
How's everybody doing today? My name is Marcus Johnson. I was incarcerated 7 years, that's 84 months. There was times in life that I was racially profiled, moving up here to the capital region, come from New York City, Manhattan. I'm from Harlem, you know. I was really living in Brooklyn. At the time I was homeless, and then I had some friends that I was going to school with in PSI in the Bronx. I lost my mom, my dad, and I'll be honest with you, because what you do doesn't make you a criminal, or nor does not make you less of a person or more of a person. because you're still part of society. I was around some people that we all make mistakes, you know, and I had a brother of mine right now. He's in Attica. The other one is in Auburn. Well, I should say I have a few more. So I can experience this and I can elaborate with it. One had 2 counts of life for murder. One was, I should say, in Washington, D.C., bank robbery and try to do what's that, Bernie Madoff, the multi-billionaire dude that was doing scams. When my mom killed herself on suicide, I come from an Italian family too, an African American and Spanish family, and Indian too. So I'm like a mutt, and at the time, me being there for the first 2 years, it kind of like messed my head up because, I'm around a bunch of men. I'm like, what is this, so. But then at the same time, for the next, 5, several years, whatever, my mom came to the conclusion and sit there and say to myself, you know what, enough is enough. And guess what? At this same token, me being homeless will result to me in being in prison, in federal prison, FDX, like where big top dogs is at, big mafia, mob people. And I was like, man, it's not me. And I was like one of the youngest people in there. And I was like, like this year will be the first year that I never been homeless, and I was homeless for 8, 9 years, and I was a high school graduate with a GED diploma. I mean, not GED, honor roll student diploma. I graduated up here in Green Tech High School, so I had some buddies I lost in the streets. I had some buddies that, just naturally caused dying cancer, or whatever you name it. I had some buddies that had HIV and AIDS and never knew it, and they kept it to themselves. And then I'm like the last of the Mohicans, I'm a black sheep, so I kind of figure out, like, when I wake up every day and I pray, what is my purpose here on this earth? So I can elaborate with, certain people that have been around certain things. I have a brother right now. I haven't seen him since I was 3 years old. I just turned 27, so that's about 24 years ago. That's like somebody got 25 to life, so I don't even know what he looked like. I just hear his voice and that's it. My dad did 30, my uncle did 21 Jump Street, so it's not always about in life of who you are. It's about, I'm gonna put a short story like this, all right? I had a buddy of mine that live in Atlanta, Georgia. One live in Miami, and they reach out to me. One from Africa, from Sierra Leone. My man Blum Okita, he African, purebred from Africa, from the Blood Diamonds. And he tell me every day, bro, what's going on with you? I said, man, I'm alive. He said, nah, you going through something else because I know that you are, you're going through some things you might not tell me, but I know it's something because I get the energy and vibe, So with the racial war with Dante Ivy on Swan Street in Albany that got killed. I've been around a lot of things like this, Detroit, Chicago, Louisiana, Baton Rouge, part of Louisiana, Texas, Dallas, Los Angeles. I've been around a lot of crazy things, and I'm like, you know what? It got to be a reason for me to prosper myself, to be alive on this earth for some reason, So sometimes it's tough to be the pigment of your skin. So if you got a tattoo, it's wrong for it to be this skin. But if you got, other skin color, it's good to have a job like that. Like if you go to the hospital, I done seen a lot of things. And I wonder why not me, So and I can speak for a lot of hate crime, It's a lot of hate crime as far as like, you got another, with the Ukraine and the Russians, and they just released like 2 people from America's troopers over there, and everybody it's in the Bible, so you just have to have like focus on what's your next destination, and it's kind of scary, don't get me wrong, because there's days that I'm scared too. I don't got no mom or no dad. My dad disowned me when I was a newborn. He said, it ain't my child. My dad hated me, so I mean, it is what it is, boy. Sometimes things in life you have to overcome your own fears, and when you do that, you become more of a stronger person, either male or female, human being, personally wise, So, my grandmother died in 1999. She had a massive heart attack. My mom had also a brain aneurysm, So I seen her die on the over the bathtub, The only light that was on was that bathroom. Everything else was dark, so I figured that she went to heaven, So, and then when became homeless, I was homeless for 8-9 years, coming out of high school, Green Tech High School in Albany, New York, where I came from New York City. I was an honor roll student with a New York State Regents diploma, and I had no support with certain people. That was about it. But then I just say, you got to roam like a fox and fight like a lion, Now, one day at a time, but everything is going to be cordial and copacetic, So with that being said, and I raised myself for like 10 winters almost, negative 10 degrees, don't know where to go at. I had a bottle and can, collect cans and bottles, go to Price Chopper just to get me a hotel room. So at times like that, like, it become like a military, like you become militant, like a Navy SEAL or something, like a Forrest Gump or something like that, So, but thank you though, people, ladies and gentlemen, thank you.
Thank you for sharing that. Thank you. That's why when I asked the question, what causes certain things, and I used to do this, speaking of Jonathan, we used to do a class together, and we'd ask that question, what causes crime? And every answer that came up, prison was not the answer to dealing with it. So, is poverty, is that prison the answer for dealing with that? Mental health issues, doesn't do it. So, there are so many things, and I've learned so much from not only people like Jonathan, but from people who've been incarcerated, because they know all of the issues that are out there, what they need help with, and what has caused certain situations. So, and as the Center for Law and Justice, we employ people who have incarceration experience because they know so much about what it takes to address it. So thank you so much. Right. Mm-hmm. Right. That's what it does to you. Right. Yeah. Right. That's another one of the impacts of incarcerating people that Michelle Alexander talks about. So thank you. Thank you.
Dr. Green, and thank you again for being with us. Thank you for the work you have done for so many years, and that I know you continue to do, and we look forward to continue with this conversation.
Yeah, I would love to.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for inviting me. Yes, yes, absolutely.